All right, here we are. Welcome everybody to another episode of What It Took. Today I'm here with Isaac. Do you have a project name, Isaac?
I just go by my name, Isaac Morris.
That's your band name?
Yeah. I also make music with my friend, but he's away for college right now, so it's just me.
Shout out to
Leo.
Shout out to Leo.
We're the brown bananas together.
Awesome. All right, that's the first link we'll put in the description.
Sick.
You'll have to send that to me though.
I will.
Now I really want to hear that. So we're here with Isaac Morris. I met Isaac through the Silver Orange and have heard a good amount of your music online, a lot of covers, and I'm super stoked on them. We haven't talked about this yet, but I think we have a very similar music taste.
Oh yeah?
I think there's a lot of crossover in the bands that we really love.
That's good, yeah. I was happy to see your comments, at least, the little, I think you asked about Big Thief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you do a cover of one of their songs, and I was
Oh,
just
yeah.
like, okay, there's a music connection happening here for sure.
Definitely.
Psychic music connection. So yeah, I wanted to just kind of sit down and take some time to chat with you just about music in general, music more specifically in terms of the stuff that you're working on,
For sure.
and sort of the interview namesake, just kind of chat and carve out time to sort of understand what it took for you to kind of get to where you're at musically, and just kind of dive into that, right? Hear some of your stories and hear about the journey that you've been on so far.
Definitely.
Yeah, so let's just kind of dive right into it, right? So what,
Awesome.
as a musician, someone who's really engaged in it and seems very passionate about it, sort of what does that journey look like for you?
Man, so I started playing guitar when I was 13, and it kind of came about because my dad played it, and I've been a very avid music listener my whole life. But I kind of was at a point where I started wanting to be able to make it a little bit more my own and expand my knowledge, because after that point I had just kind of been, there was no technical appreciation. It was just like this, I like listening to music. This is mostly all I do for fun, and I looked up to people who were musicians, and I watched other people perform growing up, and I had gone to lots of concerts and stuff, and I just wanted to see if I could branch out with that myself, and so I started messing around on guitar around 13, and picked it up fairly quickly. I mean, not great, but enough where I could throw down some chords, and mostly played covers at the beginning just because I wanted to be able to play the stuff that I loved listening to growing up, and so it started out like that. When I was 15 was maybe when I started writing, and so at that point I had a pretty solid foundation, musically and technically, and I'd like to think lyrically. I think a lot of the artists I look up to are really great writers, and yeah, and so 15 I started messing around a lot more, middle of high school, and I didn't start out wanting to play shows. That was not, or even putting music out. It was just something that I enjoyed doing on my own time, and mostly for myself, so that I could be I can play this Low song, or this Big Thief song, or this Mountain Goat song, and that's great, because it's it's just for me, It was I was I don't know, I was excited that I could kind of feel like I was getting on the level of some of those people who I looked up to, even though I wasn't playing it anywhere near as good as them. It was just I can do this too, And so when I started writing my own music, I found myself mirroring a lot stylistically of those influences, which is what everyone does. But that sort of, at first it didn't drive me anywhere other than to just keep making music that kind of sounded really similar to those, because that's like my vocal range had only gone to that point of like I can sing these Bright Eyes songs and these Mountain Goat songs pretty perfectly, because that's what I've been seeing growing up. I mean, not to toot my own horn or whatever, but like that's what I was like really solid with. And so when I started writing, that was kind of the lane I stayed in. And so a lot of my earlier songs, music wise, and also like the way I sung, was basically a flip flop between either Connor Oberst or John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats. And so, but it was a nice starting point, and I wrote a lot back then, because I was opening this door to like, I guess I was just discovering that I kind of was able to, express this part of myself, even if it was using these influences as a kind of multi-tool, in that that was it. I was completely only channeling these people. And it wasn't until I started making music with my friend Leo that it sort of took off in newer directions. We still started off with a similar sound to that, but of course there were two of us, and so we could make bigger sounds and do a lot more sonically than either of us could have done individually. But the way that our two styles and influences melded together still created a sound very reminiscent of both. There was a lot of crossover there. And so our first live shows, we were beginning of our, oh my goodness, when was this? Either end of sophomore year, beginning of junior year. So I was still like 15, 16. But we actually had been very good friends, best friends, since 7th grade. And we had been playing music together, like acoustically, like just to each other and like jamming and stuff. But I don't remember what the show was, but there was a show at the Silver Orange that I really wanted to like hop on the bill for some reason.
Awesome.
And it was at that point that I like went to Leo and I was like, we have to start a band right now. And so it was basically like, yeah, what drove us to do that was the opportunity to play a live show, which had never ever been a factor for either of us before. And so we sort of dove into that head first, but it was like exciting because it felt a lot more real. And so,
how much time did you have before the show?
Like a week and a half or 2 weeks or something.
Awesome.
Not a lot, but
Yeah.
since we played together so much anyway, it was like what was jamming is just becoming practice now. Our practice time, and so it sort of all came together pretty quickly. And the show was not that good because we were still very, beginners in a grander sense. We had once you're in the context of playing live music, the technicality of everything becomes very different. Like it doesn't translate from jamming alone in the back room of his house to playing on a stage. The only thing that translates is like, what you're playing, but even how you play it is like night and day. And so it was a really like weird, rough transition going from only playing in front of each other and not, having any of those different sound factors to the full-blown electric setup.
What was the hardest part of that transition?
Well, Leo was a very charismatic person. He was and still is, but back then that was like a very large part of his personality. But when we hit the stage, it was all gone. And so the charisma that he has, like talking to people at our first show, it just sort of like fizzled out immediately.
Wow.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and like that's not bad on him or anything, but it was just like that's just what it was. You know, we were both so used to uh, uh, either playing for a couple people or for each other, but like once you're on stage, I guess the hardest part, put into a few words, is, excuse me, it's like you suddenly have so many other things to focus on that being a stage presence becomes the last thing on your mind, like instantly. And I don't know why I'm saying that was the last thing on our minds. The second we had these other things to worry about, neither of us were focused on being a good stage presence at all. And so it sort of kind of devolved a little bit once we were up there, because we had to keep redirecting our attention. But we still had fun. You know, it was still a really good learning experience, and I think that was probably the most important part. And it was also, even though like in the moment it was kind of an esteem crusher, a little bit after the fact it was more just like exciting that we did it, and that was that ended up sort of outweighing the negative things that were really staring us in the face at the beginning of it.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome to like be able to sort of see that timeline, right? Like starting just sort of like getting into guitar, you know, connecting with some of your, I'm assuming like idols, right? Like some of your favorite musicians, kind of starting to feel what their songs felt like to play, right?
Definitely.
And like flexing that kind of muscle, having that transition into, okay, now I feel comfortable to start writing my own music, to I'm gonna start a band in a week, basically, and play our first show. And it's really interesting too to hear you talk about, like, in such, what I'm imagining, in a pretty compact amount of time, is like going from, hey, I'm just gonna learn how to play some chords, to being like, wow, now I'm thinking and focusing on what it means to have stage presence.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And one thing that I heard and thought about when you were talking about that experience and being like aware of that aspect, which is pretty high level, right? Like that's like, that's professional musician thoughts right there, right?
We'd like to think so.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's it takes a journey for sure to think about that, right? And it's really fascinating to also, you know, remark and sort of be aware of, you know, when a band starts just kind of practicing, you know, for maybe a first band or whatever, how that really isn't part of the equation.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, I can't think of a certain band that would start and have in their mind, what is our stage presence going to be like?
Right.
Right? Like, that just doesn't happen unless you have maybe a band manager or like a parent kind of managing you and telling you to think about this sort of stuff. Like, it just doesn't happen.
Right. There was no goal at the beginning at all. It was just like, we're having fun together.
Just have fun.
Yeah.
So that's extremely fascinating to me as well. Like, how do you think your relationship to the idea of music is just fun, how has that changed over time?
Oh, interesting. Well, that's kind of tough. I'd like to think that I still mostly do it for fun. I mean, I have fun doing it, like, no doubt. That's a driving factor for sure. But I feel like a lot of like the realities of making music as on a with a larger platform and an actual audience, and more resources, sort of forces the implication of some necessity for like prioritizing other things. And
Me too, I agree.
yeah,
100%.
and that actually doesn't come easy at all, like the focus on other things, because even now when I'm you know, recording with my friends in a studio or at their house or whatever, but like I'm trying to make something, it almost always turns into us jamming together, and that's all we want to do. And so it's like it's a weird, rough transition to try to force yourself to like hunker down and just like do this because you're working. And it's like great to like have a finished product, and it's even great working on it. But there's so much like temptation to just like not worry about that and have fun in the moment. But I feel like, I guess, if you have decided what you want, it's important to try to follow through with the the long term goal. And part of what made that so hard at first was that goal didn't exist. And once we started figuring out this might be something that we could make a goal, it didn't feel realistic at all. I mean, when we were 15, he had a Blue Yeti microphone, and we were recording demos in like the back of his parents' house, and that just felt like that was the best production quality we had ever seen in person and experienced. And so anything beyond that felt like a joke. It felt like that's like we'd have to have money to do that, or we'd have to talk to people in the community to do that. And up until we played shows more regularly, that was completely like out of the picture. Like at the first show, we talked to one or two people after the show, and they were like, "Oh, you guys did great," but it still felt like almost like a handout, in that we had hopped on the show and we knew how like how poorly we had like executed it, even though we like it was our first time. We were hard on ourselves. Who isn't? And that made it like we almost like didn't really take to heart any of like the compliments we got, and so we didn't see it as like as there being any attainable goal in that vein, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So yeah, that sort of stuff has been on my mind a lot recently, right? Like having open dialogues and conversations with the music community about like, whoa, what? Like, it seems really prevalent that with like all the pressures to be like a musician nowadays, there's a lot of things that pull us away from remembering that this can be fun.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many elements that are not fun that really fight for our attention.
Definitely.
And I think pull us away from the fun parts.
Yeah.
So I'm really motivated to have conversations about that, at the very least, to sort of start reminding ourselves in our community that like, yo, this is happening, and do we even know it?
Right.
Right. So I'm really glad that we can sort of start talking about that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's a clear solution for that yet, but I think it's important to start talking about it.
Definitely.
Right? What's been the hardest part of engaging with music for you so far?
Oh man. Well, we have a very illustrious local scene here in Sacramento. And although it ends up being like a little bit childish and sort of not something I like to hold on to for too long, I find myself often, and we found ourselves when Leo and I played a lot more in the scene together, like noticing how talented a lot of people are, and like getting on ourselves for like not being able to match that talent. And that I know that's a common thing in a lot of fields. Just comparing yourselves to other people all the time, and this definitely isn't an exception. It's not healthy. First of all, I want to make that very clear. It's not a good thing to fixate on, but it's a good thing to acknowledge and turn around and make it a goal for yourself. And so Leo and I sort of used that as a driving force in our motivation to actually practice. And so I guess that takes it back to that point that we brought up before, as it's sort of a challenge to find motivation when you don't see an attainable goal on the other side, but that can become a goal, sort of seeing these other people who you're playing alongside, even who you believe to be worlds better than you in terms of talent, and trying to get there yourself, and not, of course, not out of spite or a real need to compare, but just to have a physical example of an attainable goal. You know, if you watch, if you watch Eddie Van Halen and Slash YouTube videos when you're 14, and that's it, you're not, that you're like, okay, I'm never going to be able to do that. And that's it. But if you like surround yourself with other people who have been doing it longer than you, then it's a lot easier to, grasp that it's entirely like possible for you to do that, and not it's entirely possible for you to do that in like not a very long time. Like you can, especially if you play with those people more and more, you can find yourself able to catch up with them significantly more than if you are hearing them play at a show and going home and trying to do it yourself. And so in that, I also find value in playing with other people, and sort of working outside of your comfort zone in terms of like who you're used to playing around or like jamming with or whatever. And so it made it a lot easier in the sax scene to be able to do that, because there's a lot of genre crossover and social crossover, such that we were able to play with people a lot more talented than us, play at the same shows, but also like jam with them after the shows, or like hear their songs on SoundCloud or Spotify and be able to learn to that, instead of just having this image in our head of like a guitar virtuoso who we have to try to mirror note for note, and it's just ends up being ridiculous. So to have that very real community of talent is pretty valuable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever have like a mentor, or like anyone in the music community that sort of was just like encouraging to you, or like more than just kind of like, hey, you played shows with them and that inspired you, kind of like in a sort of detached sort of way, right? Like what I'm trying to say is just like, was there anyone that was just like, hey, we're gonna have regular interactions, and like I want to encourage you or support you to do whatever?
Interesting. Well, a lot of people might look at this from like a third party and immediately just say my dad, but the truth is, my dad is not that good at guitar. He'll tell you that himself. Nothing bad on him. Seriously, he was still the person who like I watched play guitar the most growing up, and like that's sort of when I wanted to start playing. But he definitely, the support lay more in the category of booking shows and whatnot. But in terms of growing as a musician, in every other way, I would say, well, not to be corny, but Leo and I sort of grew each other in that way, and being able to play off each other and hear each other's stuff in a very intimate setting allowed us to learn from each other pretty constantly. And so I think between the time that we started playing music together at like 13 or 14 and now, we have been responsible significantly for each other's growth as a musician. Also, I want to shout out Alan Antipuesto. He played at our first show, and he was the one who complimented us a lot, and sort of gave us like I don't know, like a very real reference of like this guy who he plays he does a lot of like finger picking and like hammering, like the like math rock stuff, and on acoustic guitar, and he's really good at it. And so having him like come up to us and like say all that stuff and be really real about it, that was a great feeling. And so it wasn't that he mentored us per se, because even though we ran into each other a lot more and interacted online, he didn't like play guitar with us ever, but he was like the first person who like gave us that like push to like feel excited that we might be onto something, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So if Leo was here right now, what would you ask Leo?
Oh man. Okay.
If you were interviewing Leo,
he's watching this.
Yeah, what would you ask Leo right now?
Well, I would probably have a few questions. I wouldn't want to be ridiculously self-centered, but I guess one of the questions would be about, I guess, just wondering how he feels regarding what I just said about us helping each other grow. Like, how does he feel our musical journey together impacted him as a musician individually? That would be a big question I have, I guess. And also, totally lost what I was going to say. I would ask him if he would want to, if we could turn time back, if he would have wished for another band member, because it really was just us two, and a lot of people looked at that really weirdly when we were playing shows, because having two people on stage and that's it is kind of strange sometimes. We were basically just trading between guitar and drums because we both play both, and it often felt like our presence and the whatever wow factor we have on stage might have been upped by having like a full like 3-piece, but we never did, and I never thought anything of it at the time. I was also very naive and a lot less attuned to what was like stage appropriate than he was.
All right, so I'm going to pretend I'm Leo.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you that question.
Okay.
All right, so if you could turn back time and reconsider either adding a band member or multiple other band members, would you do that? And if so, what additional instruments or members would you add?
Okay, so off the bat, I want to say I wouldn't consider it. It was great having just me and him, but if I thought about it more and like could conceptualize something that I think would sound better than what we did with someone else, I would want a bassist and a keyboard player. Actually, I know we had talked a lot actually about wishing that like on occasion that we had a third to be a lead guitarist, because it made it that would make it a lot easier. I never played lead just because I wasn't as good a guitar as him, but like when he had to like do the solos and there not be any backing rhythm guitar, that kind of sucked sometimes, and so that's something that we like brought up a lot. But I think piano or keyboard would have lent itself to our sound a lot more, and that was not actually something we ever brought up, but retrospectively, especially considering a lot of our influences, I think that sound would have been a really good addition, I guess.
So who, if there was a specific person,
Oh man.
and it could be anyone, who would you
Okay.
have wanted to add
Okay.
in to play those additional instruments?
Okay. So
Mhm.
so for piano, given the kind of piano, and I'm just gonna pull from my influences because that's who I feel the most uh, connected with in terms of like how I can envision their sound melding with ours. I would really like for John Darnielle to play the keyboard.
Your
in our
eyes just
band.
got so big. I don't know if you saw that.
Because he is not necessarily like the most technically gifted pianist, but he knows how to like provide the perfect accents to songs with a piano, and I think that's mostly what it needed. Like, I wouldn't want a keyboardist in our band to be the backing track, but with a lot of what I'm doing myself now, I've discovered that piano accents are like one of the best things that I've been able to add to my own music, and since the sound's pretty similar, I think that would, and he would be the perfect addition.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll bug you for a link to a specific track,
Definitely.
and we'll put that in the description too.
Heck yeah.
What about the other person?
Okay. So, there's a lot of great bassists in the world. A lot of great bassists. But if I had to choose one, it would probably be Thomas from Marigold, because he has an incredible stage presence, and I think bassists are usually kind of thrown into the corner, and it's pretty nice to have a bassist with charisma, and he has like the most charisma of any bassist I've ever seen, locally or at like a big show, and that's kind of impressive. And so I would choose him. Yeah.
What band is he in?
Marigold.
Marigold.
Yeah.
Are they local?
They are.
Local. Awesome.
Fantastic. I should have worn my Marigold shirt.
Link to them too. We'll put them in the, yeah. I'm always super stoked to be able to like hear and learn about new bands, so this is awesome.
Heck yeah.
Cool. All right, shout out to them. All right, let's see, what else? Yeah, maybe we could chat a little bit about like current event stuff. Like what's going on? Are y'all still making music?
We try to whenever we see each other. He lives in Oregon right now because that's where he's going to college.
Oh wow.
And so
Remote
yeah.
jamming, or are you doing that?
We've done it once. We did it once. The latency of video calls makes it a little bit hard.
Yeah,
But
not fun.
yeah, it just ends up being kind of awkward and a letdown. But
What about like sending tracks back and forth? Are you doing any of that?
we should. We haven't. I visited him like at the end of July, and we jammed a little bit then. But it wasn't a very long trip. And then he visited like a month later, like the end of August, and we jammed a little bit then. It's just never enough time to like really put something together.
Mhm.
But it's nice to do it when we see each other. But that does make me want to bring up Zach and Ethan, who first played music with Leo, and
Before you met?
but before I met either of them, not before I met Leo. Leo and I became friends when he moved to Sacramento from LA, when we were in seventh grade.
Seventh grade, right?
Yeah. And Zach and Ethan are both a little older than us, but Leo joined one of their bands called Hans, which I don't think we can link because it doesn't really exist anymore. But that's where he met them and started with them. He actually, I think he had known Zach longer because they went to the same synagogue, and then he discovered Zach's in this band and he wants to join the band, and so Leo became the bassist of their band, and they became real chummy and played music together separately from the band. And then when the band sort of broke up, they were still good friends and played music together all the time. And I was there for a lot of it, and I jammed with them a lot. And then when Leo moved away for college, I didn't really stay friends with Zach or Ethan, or at least like in close contact with them. But we all went up together. Me and Zach and Ethan went up to visit him in July, and on that trip we sort of bonded a lot. And so since
Awesome.
July,
Cool.
we've been playing together very consistently and a lot of recording as well. And so I recorded all of my most recent stuff with them. So that's been nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How many? What is that project looking like so far? Like, what have y'all got going on?
So I wrote. Okay, so it's a weird timeline, but I had an album written. It's still written. It just hasn't been recorded yet. I had an album written like in January of 2020, and I wanted it to be out by the end of the year. By like
The end of this
December.
year. Yeah.
And I don't think that's gonna happen now. But I was like looking for a place to record it. At this point I was not aware that Zach or Ethan had recording equipment or that would be an option, and we didn't really talk much anyway. But come summer, I wrote an EP, and it seemed like a lot more realistic of a goal to have that done by the end of the year. And so it was just kind of like a happy coincidence that I discovered that they have access to record equipment and that there would be a space to do that in. And so I just decided I'm going to record this EP and have that done by the end of the year. Still have the album waiting to be recorded, and now I actually have another album written also waiting to be recorded. But as of right now, the EP is done, and I've been working on that with them for the past couple months.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So what does that process look like? Have they been engineering? Like, did you record all of it, or how did that work?
So it's, I guess, maybe an unorthodox process in some ways, in that we weren't very productive. I mean, it took us 3 months to record 4 songs, and those songs had already been written and composed, and so a lot of the time was spent just jamming, messing around, and recording other stuff like little songs and demos here and there. But in terms of the process for the EP, they were mostly, Ethan helped engineer a lot, Zach helped engineer a little bit as well, but they were mostly just there. And so for a lot of it, I was just recording, and they were there because we would sort of split it up to, like, in this session we'll jam for 3 hours, and then any of us can record for 3 hours. And so it was, we're sort of all individually kind of perfectionists, and so it's hard for us to want to like outsource a lot of the process of making a song. And so for a lot of it, if any of us were recording, the other two were just kind of there and like watching them record, which is like still great to have. It's weird to me being alone in a studio, and even if I'm like the only one doing everything. But I was using Ethan's equipment, so shout out to him for that. That was I wouldn't have been able to do it if that wasn't there. And then I also used a lot of their instruments for the process of the EP, just because combined we had a lot of musical equipment, and so we just kind of all used each other's. We all hauled our stuff over to Ethan's house, and it's been there for 3 months, and so all of my instruments are at Ethan's house, and they'll probably be there for another few months. But yeah, that's the
Wow, neat. So
Yeah.
like a 3-hour jam session, and then just kind of 3 hours to record whatever happened, or
Yeah.
whatever was kind of working right.
basically.
Did you play all the instruments on the EP, or
I did.
You did?
I played everything.
So what was everything?
So it
Drums,
there's drums on a little bit of it.
bass,
There's bass, there's
Guitar?
guitar, acoustic and electric. There is a lot of synth, like keyboard instruments. I did some strings on a synthesizer, and then there's actual piano and keyboard piano, and viola, like an actual viola that we
Wow.
mic'd up. And I think that's it. Yeah.
What was the hardest thing to record?
Darn, the drums.
Drums.
We just didn't have. We had a one mic setup for the whole kit, and it's not a great mic, and so we really had to, get the gain exactly right so that it wasn't blowing out our headphones, and we could still pick up the kick. It was a kind of crappy process, but the end result was like fine. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love hearing people getting just sort of creative with like a one mic setup on a kit, right? Because that's another thing that took me forever to learn is like creative constraints,
Definitely.
right? And like using those as like part of the palette, right? Like part of the entire process and like part of the language of making music.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Which is so fun. I love that.
Me too.
So it's super exciting. So how many songs did you record?
So there are, oh goodness, I recorded 4 songs for the EP. So it's 4 songs. One of them split up into 2 parts, and then there's an interlude. So it's 6 tracks. And then I recorded another song also that I'll probably release as a single like a couple weeks after the EP. But
Neat.
yeah, EP is 4 songs, 6 tracks.
Were there any songs that you had written for the EP specifically that you ended up not using?
Not really. I sort of had the vision in mind, and it came together pretty fast. I wrote the 4 songs in like a 1 month period, which is, I guess, kind of long, but just the way it came together, it still like flowed pretty well. And so I ended up doing what I set out to do in that sense. But sometimes, even though like in real time it did kind of drag, it felt like exactly how it was supposed to go. So I don't know. I was happy with that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. If you were to give some advice to a new musician that is potentially struggling with like being confident and starting to write songs, what kind of advice or what kind of message would you share with them?
It's interesting. I actually just texted someone about this for like an hour the other day. So I got an answer ready.
That's cool. Awesome.
Yeah. So I would say if you have any ideas, because a lot of times people just like start out with like a concept or even a lyric that they want to make into something more, give it context, because you can come up with like a cool one line, but unless you can like figure out where that came from within yourself, or like write a story around it if one doesn't exist, you're usually just left with one line, and then it's like, yeah, it's hard to build off of that unless you can contextualize it. So that's a tip that I like use for myself a lot, because I often like wake up at 1 a.m. and I'm like, oh, here's this like cool lyric, and then it's in my notes for 2 months until I can think of like context for it. And so that's something that I think is a good jumping off point a lot of the time. But in terms of like the bigger picture, I think it's just like you have to start with what you have. You can't decide that you need more resources to get started, because you don't. And if you want to get it started, you can, like with whatever you have.
Yeah.
That's sort of that was the biggest lesson I learned, I think, because when it's still abstract, you or I sort of told myself that I needed some next level of resources to like jump off from. But when it comes down to it, once you have the passion and the idea, that's kind of all you need. And anything is a good jumping off point from there, because you just got to work with what you have, I guess, is the ultimate point. It ends up being a waste of time to focus on like trying to find more resources. I actually recorded my first like 10 or 15 songs on a Kindle Fire. I with like, it's like a little crappy like 2 megapixel back camera, and it didn't have a voice recorder, so I used this like crappy like Kindle camera to record my songs and then convert them to MP3s, and it's just stuff like that, you know, like if that's like what you have access to, then use it, because you'll look back and like wish you had these like something to show for like how you got started, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Or like flash forward 20 years and you might wish that you had written and recorded an entire album on a Kindle.
Yeah.
Right.
No kidding.
Which,
Auction it off.
man, please do that. I've never heard of anyone recording to a Kindle before, so this is really fun for me. And just opened up my mind a bit, so that's cool. All right, so do you have any kind of final messages or things you want to share with the people watching?
Yeah, so I have an EP coming out on October 23rd. That's this Friday. That part doesn't matter. It comes out October 23rd, 2020. It's called The Hearing. It's going to be out on all platforms under Isaac Morris. That's my name.
We'll put a link in the description for sure.
Perfect. And it's up for interpretation. I won't spoil any part of it. Kind of low production value, but I spent a lot of time on it and been working on it for the past few months. I'm happy with how it turned out.
Sorry, my phone was going nuts.
No worries.
I'm really excited to hear it too. I can't wait for that to get released.
Yeah.
I'll definitely do my part to share it
Heck
as
yeah,
much as
thank you.
possible. And do you have like a Venmo?
I do.
Okay,
Venmo.
sweet. I'm gonna put that in the description as well, and I'm gonna try and make that really bold.
Awesome. That would be really great.
One thing that I'm really trying to share in these kind of interviews as well is we don't have to wait to buy music from our local music scene.
For sure.
I really want to put it out there and let people know that you can just support Isaac or any of the local bands here in Sacramento just by donating to them, right? We don't have to wait to buy an album from a musician. We can support them in advance, preemptively, to help them continue to create, right? To help cover the costs of everything that is needed to be a musician nowadays, right? I 100% agree that musicians should absolutely make music with what they have access to, but the flip side is some people just don't even have funds for the equipment that they want to use, right?
That's very true.
Yeah, there's a lot of costs associated with being a musician and trying to pursue that as a career. So I really think we should preemptively support musicians, not only pay them for the music that they release. So
Heck yeah.
Everyone watching, definitely click on the Venmo link. Yeah, period. Support your local scene.
I'll also try to, I didn't actually think of this until just now. I will try to get it on Bandcamp as well, because up to this point I was never planning on selling it. I guess it like has to on iTunes, but I'll put it on Bandcamp also if you want to actually buy it or a physical copy.
Sweet. Right on. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it. It was a blast.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Peace out. See you next time.
Heck yeah.